Hey, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of Off Cooldown, the podcast where three gamer friends just talk about, well, gaming. I'm Q.
I'm Cal.
And I'm Neutral, and tonight we are having our first Upkeep episode where we keep up with the latest trends and news in the video game industry. And for today's episode, we're going to be talking about E3 2021.
But before we get into tonight's episode, there's a lot to talk about. Before that, we have a bit of announcement. Off Cooldown is now available on 7 different platforms. So aside from our Facebook and YouTube, you'll now also find us on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Breaker, and Radio Public. So you can just watch us on any of those platforms. We'll be live the moment when you're seeing this. We'll be there on all the other ones as well.
So yay, perfect. We're gonna be hearing ourselves from 7 different platforms now. I'll be probably listening in on Spotify. It's my favorite
it's the most
platform for
convenient.
podcasts. Yeah.
So, right into it. Let's talk a little bit about E3. There might be a couple of viewers out there who might not be too familiar with the conference, so let's talk about it. What is it? Why is it so important?
Okay, so E3 is it used to be the year's highlight gaming event. So the TLDR is that it's organized by the Entertainment Software Association, or the ESA. The first one ever was held in 1995, and it used to be an industry-only trade show. But in 2017, it opened to the public, so it's basically more of a convention lately. But last year's one, 2020, the E3 for 2020 was cancelled because of the pandemic, and then the one for this year was a digital-only event.
So if you're a video game publisher or a developer, it's kind of like an aspiration in the video game industry to one day land yourself in E3 2021. It's the convention in the video gaming industry, which has all of the eyes on it every time that it comes on live. And there's pretty much very large expectations when you come on stage at E3 in every year that it has been on public.
Yeah, like E3 is it's the big conference, the big gaming event where it comes to news. A lot of people like to release or showcase all of the new games. First time here, they do world premieres all the time. So this year's E3, it's got some pretty mixed reviews because I guess partly it was entirely online. So from what we heard from the E3 news this year, what did you guys like the most? What were you all hyped about?
For me, none of my big heavy hitting expectations showed this year. So I was slightly disappointed by that. But a lot of promising indies showed up, and a lot of strategy games showed up as well. So I'm pretty happy. I saw more of Humankind, which is a new Civ competitor, and then the new Age of Empires also showed up. So after being absent for a real long time, we finally have more news about that. And then there's a bunch of cute indies that showed up as well. So
yeah, I also felt like the AAA, the AAA publishers and devs this E3 didn't really have that much to show for, unlike other years. I mean, there are definitely still some here and there. Obviously, my highlight, the ones that we gave out, mine was Elden Ring, and I would consider FromSoft to be pretty AAA. But overall, it just felt a lot less hype. Maybe it was just me, but I wasn't really as hyped for E3's AAA. But the indie devs, I feel like there were so many diamonds in the rough, so many gems from things like the Wholesome Direct, or what was that other one? The Guerrilla, what was that?
Guerrilla Collective.
Yeah, that one. There were a lot of titles there, like Death Trash. You guys can go check out. I would specifically want to shout out as early as now. Check out those indie titles. You're definitely gonna find something that's for you.
Well, actually, I've also been watching all of the E3 conferences since day one because it's kind of my job, and it kind of really felt underwhelming this year compared to the previous years. But there's still a lot of we should give credit where credit is due. Ubisoft, Microsoft, and Nintendo did really brought the big guns in, but a lot of their announcements really were just things that we already knew about. There were a couple of things that we were waiting for that didn't show up, so that's kind of disappointing. We'll be talking about those things later on. But for me, the things that hyped me up a lot, well, we're seeing right now the Devolver Digital Showcase. It wasn't really about the games that got me hyped up around here, but Devolver Digital's conferences in E3 and everywhere else really just hyped up. They have their own cinematic universe. Like imagine you're a video game publisher and you're having your very own cinematic universe. And I can't even remember any of the games that they revealed. Like on the top of my head, I can't remember anything. I just remember all the wackiness that they did in their showcase.
Yeah, if you watched all the previous showcases, they really do have the cinematic universe. They got this continuous narrative, and it always ends the same way with like the to be continued next E3. They always love to do these satirical takes on things, on trends in the gaming industry. Like I think last year it was all about everyone starting to do directs, and then Devolver had their own Devolver Direct, and then yeah,
I just love it this year in the program. The first E3 show was Ubisoft Forward, followed by Devolver Forwarder, which is like this whole publishing company is just trolling the whole video game industry at this point. But aside from Devolver Digital, I've also been looking forward to Nintendo Showcase. They did announce a lot of new things like Breath of the Wild. Well, they didn't announce a new Breath of the Wild 2, but they showed new footage of Breath of the Wild 2. They announced Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp, which is something that I'm really looking forward to. So much more than
Kazuya and Smash.
Yeah, and then you have Kazuya and Smash, and then we got to see gameplay footage of Shin Megami Tensei 5. More details about the Age of Calamity DLC, and then the Mario Golf Super Rush. So I think Nintendo really saved this year's E3, to be honest. And of course, you also mentioned the indie games. On top of my head, the games that I'm really looking forward to are Despot's Game, which is like Auto Battler from, Auto Chess from Dota, and what's that
Tactics,
version? Yeah, Teamfight Tactics from League of Legends. We also have Trash Sailors, which is like a love child between Raft and what do you call it? Don't Starve. And then you also have Death Trash, which Q already mentioned earlier. I actually wasn't looking forward to Death Trash at first because of the name. Literally, when we were watching together the E3 showcase in our own Discord channel, we were like laughing at the name. What's with the indie titles this year? They all have trash in their names, and we were like just laughing at it. But then I watched YouTube videos about it and learned about how it's like a love letter to the original Fallout games, and really understood what kind of game it is. I really encourage everyone to download the demo on Steam while you still have the chance, because it's going out on August 5 this year. And then there are also other big titles that were announced during E3 2021 that I'm really looking forward to. We have Outer Worlds 2, which they satirically also announced. They were saying, we haven't done anything yet except for the title. So they still don't have a release date for that. It's coming out in TBA. And then we got a release date for Age of Empires 4, which I'm totally gonna buy on day one.
Day one?
Yes.
Wow.
That brave, like, I don't care if the multiplayer sucks. I'll just play it for the single player.
Yeah, the campaign is worth it.
Yeah, it's worth it with just the campaign. And then also Atomic Heart. It's like a mix between Bioshock, Fallout, and what's that other game? Metro. So it's a weird Fallout kind of game set in Russia. I think the genre they call it, a subgenre of steampunk, which is atomic punk, wherein everything's like ruined because of nuclear stuff. And then we also got the reveal of Guardians of the Galaxy, another Marvel game from Eidos Montreal, if I'm not mistaken.
Marvel IP game went.
Yeah, I just hope that they learned their lessons from the previous Marvel game.
It remains to be seen. They haven't actually announced if it was a live service game or not. They said it was single player, but even single players these days can be live services. You never really know.
You never really know. Right.
But then again, I guess it's not MCU. So, well, actually, the last one wasn't MCU either, was it? I don't know if that's a good
it's
thing
not
or a bad
MCU.
thing. Yeah, it's not MCU. We don't have Chris Pratt as Star-Lord this time.
Yeah.
But we get the music from the movies are coming to the game. We have that at the very least. And
I don't know. I don't know if I'm still excited for that sort of stuff.
Well, at least the banter of the game, it's really cool. And the very last game that I'm really excited about, they gave a release date for Diablo 2 Resurrected. And for all of you fans of Diablo or Torchlight or Path of Exile, this game will have up to 8 players co-op, and they're going to be implementing cross-platform progression and cross-platform play in the future. But it's coming out this September 23, so I'm
I
really
hope
looking
they're
forward
not,
playing that game with my friends.
I hope they're not implementing the auction house like Diablo 3 had, because
Uh-oh.
We all know
Hopefully
how
they
that went.
learned.
I have high hopes for Diablo 2 Resurrected, mostly because of the developers. It's being developed by Vicarious Visions. They've done a really great job in the past in porting. You know, when you have a PS2 game, you have to port it to the Game Boy or into the DS. They were kind of the people who were doing that back then, and they do a really good job in, you know, downgrading stuff. If you catch my drift. But in the previous years, recent years, they've also been doing a lot of remakes and remasters. They're the people behind Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1+2, which is kind of like the first Tony Hawk game in more than a decade that is half decent. It's actually a really great game according to critics. I haven't actually played it. But
I've played a little bit of it, and yeah, it hits all the high notes of all of the classic skater games. I grew up playing Tony Hawk, the original Pro Skater games on PS1, and I played a lot of Tony Hawk's Underground 2 on PS2. And they just really captured the feel of the skateboard moves being nice and the combos feeling fresh. Like there's just enough mechanical input to keep you going, like just doing combos like crazy in the skate parks.
yeah, that's why I'm really excited of Diablo 2. Are you a fan of Diablo games, Cal?
Not really. I'm more of a Blizzard RTS fan, so I'm still not sold on Blizzard right now because they ruined Warcraft 3 Remastered.
No, they've ruined a lot more than Warcraft 3
Yeah,
recently.
but yes.
Yeah, speaking
Actually, did Blizzard make an appearance this E3?
No, I don't think so.
They
No,
didn't
they
even.
didn't- They don't
like
have
the-
their.
Yeah.
Because they usually do their own
They do it on
conferences at
BlizzCon, right?
BlizzCon land.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's kind of weird that. Was BlizzCon? I don't remember if BlizzCon even had a thing this year yet.
They already had one back in February. But it's
I
like
guess it
pretty
was
low
that
key
memorable
because
to me.
it's online.
Yeah,
And
I just
actually,
remember
speaking
Overwatch 2.
yeah, Overwatch 2.
Oh,
Speaking
oh,
of the Warcraft 3 remastered or reforged as they call it, it was actually the same team who was assigned to remaster Diablo 2 as well. But then, because of the failure of Warcraft 3 Reforged, they decided to give the developing rights to Vicarious Visions instead. And I think that's a really good decision by Blizzard. And I'm really hyped up about Diablo 2 Resurrected. And actually, early alpha reviews about it have been really good. And I'm really just looking forward to play this game. How about you guys? I've been talking about specifics on what games hype me up. I feel like I've been talking a lot already. How about you guys? What games have you been hyped up about from E3?
Well, I played like my pick for like we picked our favorite games from E3, right? Mine was the Immortal Mayor, which was a game from China, and it's a city builder that's set in China with like lots of divine Xianxia stuff going on. I tried the demo and it's kind of unstable, but foundationally it seems like it's gonna be a fun city builder. It has a lot of mechanics that other city builders don't have. Like it has health and sanitation, hygiene and stuff, which is strangely absent from a lot of other city builders that are set in medieval Europe for some reason. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. I'm looking forward to the full release. I'll probably get it day one. You already mentioned Age of Empires 4. I've been waiting for that since they announced it. I'm really glad it exists again. I'm also looking into Humankind as something to, you know, change things up a bit between playing Civ or Endless Legend. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. I also watched the whole Square Enix conference and felt a bit sad I didn't see any FF16 and they only replayed FF7 intergrade trailers in it.
Wait,
So
I think we have to talk about that, the Square Enix one, because I have a really big bone to pick with that. I don't even. Stranger of Paradise. Yeah, that one.
yeah. Kill Chaos. Kill Chaos, man.
Chaos.
You know what? It's such a disaster. Like, they announced it and people were like very mixed about it, and then they released a demo for it on the PS5 that didn't actually work until
right,
like
for the first 2
after
days.
2 days. Yeah, and then I played the demo, and I was like, I kind of get what kind of game they're trying to aim for here. It's kind of like a mix between Final Fantasy and Neo or Dark Souls, But
I mean,
by
it's
mixing
from Team
them up,
Ninja, right?
yeah, it's from Team Ninja, so
Yeah, so they
you
made
kind of
Neo.
expected it. But
Yeah.
because of mixing things up like that, it didn't feel like it's Final Fantasy. It also didn't feel like it's Dark Souls or Neo at the same time. It's like felt so bland. It did feel like it's the Final Fantasy game that we've been waiting for.
I feel like part of it might also be because of the general aesthetic of the whole thing. I don't just mean visually, but the feel of it. Like on one hand, there is the disaster that is Jack's character design. And what kind of name is Jack? Like, you come from Final Fantasy, you have names. You have the people like Zidane. You have like Noctis. You have
Jack.
You have Jack. Like what kind of? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I'm over. Maybe I'm one of the people that overreacts with this stuff, but it's so bad. Come on, Nomura, you can do better than that. We've seen you do better than that. And aside from the character designs, like the levels that we've seen so far and the color palette, is it just me or has FF been like they've been shifting far away from the colorful origins that they had? Like I haven't even played a lot of the FFs. Like, I've only played Tactics Advanced and FF14, but I look at FF9 and then I look at all the new FF stuff coming out. It's like, why is everything so black now? Like why is it all so dark? Like why is it so devoid of color? Did everyone like show up at a Hot Topic and then decide that, oh, this is where we're gonna buy all of our clothes and all of our set pieces from now on, just from Hot Topic?
To be fair, 15 did get kind of dark, but there's also a lot of color in the other zones. It's just the main city of Insomnia that's really dark. But that's thematic.
Same thing with the character design as well, though, right?
Yeah, that's
Like,
true. But that's
The
story reasons.
the emo boy band aesthetic
Yeah.
that they've been going with. Is that a Nomura thing? I'm not familiar enough.
I think it might be.
Yeah, Nomura really likes his leather belts.
Jack doesn't even
Is
have
that
that
the
many
same
belts.
person? Nomura is the guy who has a fetish on belts, right, Cal?
Yeah,
You're the Square Enix.
Yeah.
Yeah, even the character that he introduced to Final Fantasy 14 in Shadowbringers got a lot of belts, and it's got
Yeah.
that whole sort of dark clothing kind of goth. I don't know if goth's the right term.
PF look.
Yeah. But yeah,
And there's
Not
another
excited
disappointment
for Stranger
actually in Square
Paradise.
Enix's in Square Enix's conference, and it came from a game publisher or a game developer that you guys really talked about a lot during our previous episode. Can you guys remember which game this was? From Square Enix conference. It's made by Platinum Games.
I forgot the name of the game.
Babylon's
actually.
Fall.
Yeah.
Babylon's Fall.
Babylon's Fall.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to feel about that. I feel like the combat will probably be solid because it's platinum, but I don't know if I have room for another live service game in my life.
It also the trailer kind of made it look generic. It looks like one of those games that you see, one of those fake games that you see in movies. Like
Oh, yeah.
you have a scene in the movie and there's like the teenage child playing a video game and it's just some generic action RPG TM. And that's what Babylon's Fall kind of looks like to me.
Yeah, it looks kind of rough right now.
I don't know if it's really just an art style thing, but what they've shown us is so little, and it doesn't really give us much hype. Because they've shown us so little about it, and what little we
Yeah.
do know kind of looks, relatively generic. Or is it just me? Like, what do you guys think of Babylon's Fall?
Well, in
I'm
terms
not
of
sure how to feel. Sorry.
you go on, Cal.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to feel about it. It does look quite generic, and I'm not sure if like the mission structure is gonna be fun for co-op. How many friends am I actually gonna be able to convince to buy this game and then play it with me?
What will the
I mean,
microtransactions be like?
Yeah, live service kind of rough right now.
Cough, MCU, the Marvel live service game.
Yeah.
In terms of theme, I'm not sure if you guys have played Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles.
I haven't. That was on the
Neither have
Wii.
I.
Yeah, well, for those of you listeners who are familiar with Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, Babylon's Fall kind of feels like that game, but make it edgier and make everyone emo. And I don't really think I'd appreciate that. And a lot of fans who have
That feels
been
like,
waiting for Babylon's
Feels like
Fall.
a bit of a recurring. Sorry, that feels like a bit of a recurring theme with Square Enix's presentation. All that emo, dread, edgy.
Yeah. Yikes.
Yeah, and a lot of people have been following this. Like, I'll admit it. I found out about Babylon's Fall during Square Enix's presentation, but apparently it has been announced for a long time. It's been in the works for a long time. When they first announced it, they announced it as a single-player experience. So a lot of people really felt betrayed now that it's a multiplayer game and a live service game at that.
I was actually
Yeah.
not aware of that it had a following beforehand because it was the first that I've heard of it in this year's E3 actually.
I've heard of it before, but it was already live service when I heard about it. It was a single player game? Damn. You missed out on that.
You know, Platinum Games are really good at making single player games with like longevity in their minds, like replayability in their minds,
Yeah.
you know. And actually, apart from Square Enix, there's been a lot of disappointments here. You know, Nintendo kind of gets a pass for not revealing their new Nintendo Switch console because beforehand they really went out of their way to tweet that their E3 showcase will be entirely software only. So they're like, okay, guys,
Oh.
don't expect a Nintendo Switch announcement here. We're not gonna be announcing any hardware. And yeah, it kind of like diffused some of the people's expectations so that without the Switch announcement, everyone still felt fine. I mean, Nintendo's conference was actually fantastic. They had Metroid Dread, they have SMT5, Breath of the Wild 2, and all of that, which were really hyped up. And I think they also benefited from the disappointments for the previous shows. Like, expectations were really low already. Like, the
Yeah.
bar was so low that whatever Nintendo puts out, I think, at that time would have been perfect.
Mm.
But then, do you remember, Cal, what followed the Nintendo showcase?
What came next after Nintendo?
It
I
was-
didn't watch it live.
Was it Namco or was
Yeah,
it
it was
Capcom?
Bandai Namco and was
Oh,
one
yeah,
of the most
that one.
disappointing shows.
I
Oh,
stayed
gee.
so long. My God, I waited for it, and then when I watched it, I was like, they showed one game, that shooter thing with the Cajun Empire setting, something.
And they were like, I was
then-
like, okay, this game's interesting. Alright, so they're talking about for the past 30 minutes now, and I like,
Yeah.
and then they just suddenly said, okay, that's it for a show. And, what? Really? That's it? You're just
Yeah, they
showing
had-
us one game
One
for your
game.
whole E3 showcase, and you're given the opportunity to close E3 this year? Are you kidding me? Bandai Namco has a lot of different titles under their belt, and they chose to just feature one game.
Yeah, man. I would have like just give me what's coming in the next second season pass or whatever. Tales of Arise didn't show up. What the hell? So yeah, I actually
No.
thought I was slightly hallucinating when I saw the conference end because like one game, it's
Yeah,
like
that-
5 a.m.
Bandai Namco said that Tales had its place in the Summer Games Fest before E3.
I guess.
No, they should have shown it again. Like I would have been hyped if they showed it again.
Yeah.
And
But
then,
we should. Can I dial back a little bit? We have to talk about a little bit more about Nintendo. I want to talk about Metroid Dread because I think it's such a big thing. Because I think this is the first, return to form of a true Metroidvania that Metroid has had since Metroid Fusion, which is 2002.
this
That
was a
like,
Game
what,
Boy Advance game for those people who
Yeah.
are not aware.
That was like 19 years ago. And then, I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed the Metroid on the DS, Metroid Prime, I think it was. But that one was like a first-person shooter. It was really, really different. And now they're returning, finally, at long last, to their original form as a Castlevania, a Metroidvania type game, for the first time in almost 2 decades. I think that's something that we have to talk about. I'm pretty excited for it. Have you guys had any experience with Metroid games before?
I'm gonna take over because I know Cal doesn't have any
Yeah, I don't.
Nintendo system. Yeah, but actually, I grew up not knowing about Metroid. It's funny actually because I've been playing a lot of classic games, but I never really encountered Metroid until I played Smash. That's when I learned about the existence of Samus Aran. And then I played some of the Metroid games on the DS, which were already in 3D. And actually, I have to correct you on one of the. I mean, you're correct that Metroid Dread is the first new story that is going back to the Metroidvania form. But actually, they did a Metroidvania game, 2D platformer in the 3DS. I think it was released in 2018 or 2019, if I'm not mistaken. But that was a remake of Metroid 2, Samus Returns, if I am not mistaken. So yes, this is the first new Metroid game, entirely new Metroid game, that is going back to its 2D side-scrolling platformer roots since 2002, I think. So it's really a big deal, actually. Like, imagine you created a whole new genre, and then you went away from it. Like, like Metroid did. They created the Metroidvania genre, and then they went FPS all of a sudden. And not to um not to stomp on those FPS games, because some of those are really good as well. Like as Q already mentioned, Metroid Prime was really good, and people have been waiting for Metroid Prime 4 since forever, and they were really expecting Metroid Prime 4 here in this E3. But even though they didn't reveal anything about Metroid Prime 4 here in this year's E3, I think people still felt excited about Metroid Dread.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's, it's not something that we expected from Nintendo, especially because it's not that the IP has been dead. It's just that they haven't really been supporting it as much as they have supported their other IPs in recent history. But yeah, like, it's something to be excited about. It's something that should be on your radar, and I wanted to point that out.
Yeah, so
anyway.
this is the part where we convince Cal to buy a Nintendo Switch.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
I mean, if you're not gonna do it for Metroid Dread, then at least do it for Breath of the Wild, because that is an experience that I would love to replicate. That's why I've been really excited for Breath of the Wild 2. And I don't feel like I've had that same experience on other platforms. Like I've tried games like, everyone always does the comparison with the Genshin Impact, but it's really, they're at their core, they're very, very different games. One of them is an exploration game. The other one's a game that has exploration in it.
I see. And gotcha.
Unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So where were we before I mentioned Nintendo again? We just finished talking about the disappointing display that was Bandai Namco's presentation, if you could call it that.
Oh.
Yeah, I was gonna say, apart from Bandai Namco, another big publisher really dropped the ball here. Have you guys heard of this video game publisher called Capcom?
Yeah.
Oh, is that some kind of small indie publisher? I'm kidding. Yeah, what of Capcom?
Well, yeah, basing from their, E3 presentation, you would feel like they're a small indie game company, because they didn't really reveal anything new for this one. And, a lot of people have been expecting news about Resident Evil Village DLCs. That was a very successful game. And, every other publisher or developer would have been preparing DLCs. That has been the norm nowadays, that even before you publish, or even before the release date of your very first game, you're already preparing for the DLCs and the expansions, right? That's why they're already selling season passes even before the release of the game. So a lot of
occasionally
people,
they also sell like day one DLCs.
yeah, day one DLCs, and a lot of
practice.
people have really been expecting Capcom to deliver news about Resident Evil Village DLCs or expansions, and they really had to deflate the situation or the hype by announcing at E3 that they've started working on the DLC just now because of popular demand. I can remember the presentation. They were like, Resident Evil, due to popular demand, Resident Evil 4 Village DLC is now being developed. Like, you could have just announced that on your Twitter, right? Why do you have to put it center stage at E3 and disappoint everyone? You could have just announced it beforehand, right?
I think they were riding on the hype of just the name of Resident Evil Village. It's just like the biggest stage. We're gonna make a big announcement. Oh, a big quote unquote big announcement, where it's really just taping the name of their biggest release so far, and then just saying that, we're doing something.
It sounds like Elder Scrolls 6 flashbacks.
This also sounds like Starfield. Like we get a cinematic trailer and we know nothing about it. It's been a while since they first announced the new IP.
And people were really disappointed with Capcom because, got to give them props, right? They're developing a lot of new games right now. They have Monster Hunter Rise, you have Monster Hunter Stories 2, the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles are coming up, and they have really good games, and people are like excited to see what's next from them. But as some Twitter users have been pointing out, I think this is the first time that a company went into E3 and announced 0 new games. They just talked about their upcoming releases and announced 0 new games. What's up with that?
Well, I guess for one thing, we have to understand as well that aside from the fact that, these are... It's a pretty disappointing E3 show overall, especially from the AAA titles, because there wasn't really all that much that was announced compared to previous years. But something that we have to consider is the current state of the world, right? So many people, so many developers are put into development hell because of the pandemic. And I feel like that's not something that we touched, that the E3 conference managed to touch upon. Like the side of the developers, the side of the publishers that are having a hard time with the global crisis that's going on right now. So I think we can get into that.
Yeah, well, actually, I wanted to point out another disappointing thing from Ichi before we delve into the reasons why it has been so disappointing. There's another publisher, Take Two Interactive, which they develop they publish GTA games, 2K games. They're a really big publishing company. So going into E3, the fans of those games would be expecting a lot from them, but instead they went into E3 with what they call the Play for All accountability panel, and they just talked about equity and inclusion. I mean, those are really important topics, but I'm not sure if E3 is the platform for that. I mean, props to them for using their platform on E3, reaching a lot of people. But I think the people who they are trying to connect with, or the people that they're trying to change, just got annoyed even more, and it's not gonna change them. If you were watching on YouTube, because I was watching at YouTube, the comment section was at its most toxic during the session where they're talking about non-toxicity and inclusivity in gaming. So there's really this disconnect in E3 2021 where publishers delivered something that is a disconnect from what their fans really wanted. There really is a disconnect between the fans and the publishers and developers in this year, which is I think what really resulted to the disappointments that we had in this year. But as you did mention, there are a lot of factors going into this that really led to these disappointments, mostly because of COVID-19, and we're gonna touch on that right now.
No, real quick, back to the Take Two, what Take Two Interactive's presentation was. As Newt mentioned, it is an important discussion, and I'm glad that they took that first step to do something using their platform, even despite the community's feedback to it, the large part of the community's feedback. Doing such a move like that, where you would go on E3 where everyone's hyped for new games and you would just have a panel about equity in gaming. It's a step in the right direction, but it's a small step, and it's something that we as a community have to address, because we can't just live with this toxicity forever. We can't just sweep it under the rug, saying that it's always been a part of the gaming community and that there's no way that you can change the minds of everybody on the internet. But I think that it's part of the responsibility of developers and publishers to at least try, right?
Yeah.
Especially because they're their communities. These are their games.
And actually, you might have something to say about this, Carl, because if our viewers or listeners don't know yet, Carl actually founded here this movement called Respect is Easy, which aims to combat toxicity in gaming. So what can you say about Take-Two's initiative here?
So for me, I'm personally really glad they took the time to do it. I'm not sure if E3 was the right place to do it, because the expectations of people are different from what they're showing, and that usually leads to gamer bro toxicity coming out of the woodwork. But I am glad they took the time to address things like that. Definitely need more of that in the industry. I feel like maybe more publishers doing it, probably not at E3 or big trade shows, but like communicating with their player bases more, handling their communities better, stuff like that. And definitely stuff in game, especially for like online games and multiplayer, will probably be even bigger of a help than just one panel at E3. So yeah, they gotta walk the walk as well.
Yeah, walk the walk and talk the talk, so that hopefully the community follows suit as well.
Yeah.
So, more on to the reactions of the community, not only to Take-Two, but to E3 as a whole. Like, as we mentioned earlier, myself included, we are rather disappointed with E3 as a whole, but we have to also discuss, and we have to get into why it ended up this way. Like, where it's not like it's not like there were no factors that led to E3 being the way it is now. Like one big thing is the fact that it's a fully online presentation, and the reason for that, as we're all experiencing right now, is still the global pandemic that's still going on. A lot of countries, most countries, all countries are still affected, and they still feel the ripples of the effects from the start of the pandemic, even from countries that have recovered much better than others. And that kind of thing affected everybody, game devs included. So we should get into that.
Yeah,
And it's-
definitely.
Yeah, and it's important to actually note at this point, for those of you who are really like feeling disappointed right now, that it's okay to feel disappointed about E3. We understand you. We're also disappointed, but it's also important, to stay human or like remain civil about things and consider what has been happening around us before we send death threats to the developers and the publishers, because that happens a lot. You don't get what you want, send death threats on Twitter as if
Oh my
those
God.
people aren't actually people who have feelings.
Yeah,
So-
death threats on Twitter as if the developers themselves aren't disappointed that they're not able to make these games. Like, these are on their side. A lot of the time, these are projects that they pour their heart and soul in. They love working on it as much as you would love playing them, and none of that helps. Like, none of that toxicity online really helps. So more
And-
onto the specific topic, like.
Yeah.
For the gaming industry as a whole, or for maybe more on the specific things, if we can have some examples on how COVID-19 and how the global pandemic has affected game development this year and last year as well.
So for me, probably my easiest example for this would be FF14 related, because you were supposed to get, like, the usual calendar for FF14 is to get expansions every other year in July. But this year's expansion Endwalker is coming in November because we had a big delay. They also weren't able to finish Ultimate on time, which is the hardest raid tier in the game. So they're also moving that to November. And basically, we also had a lot of patches get delayed. We had like less events throughout the year in game. So they also had like a long explanation about that. They even apologized because they had to move to working from home. There's a lot of change that came with the pandemic, of course. A lot of teams had to suddenly adapt to working at home, and then they wouldn't meet each other and be able to brainstorm the same way. So I guess despite this E3 being disappointing, I kind of understand why. There's nothing we can do about it right now, generally. So
And to
Yeah.
just add some figures on that, so that we can substantiate our claims, they actually did a survey during the Game Developers Conference in 2020, and the resulting survey said that a third of all developers stated that COVID-19 caused delays on their games that they were working on, and it's because a combination of having to deal with COVID and also the transition to going to work from home. There's a lot of technical problems there. Like, we understand that sometimes working from home could be more efficient, but development of games are very collaborative projects, and it's important to actually get to meet people or be in the same room together, or even just having the same workspace together so that you can share files together, right? So a lot of these things contributed to delays in games, and actually it worsened in 2021. By 2021, the number actually increased to 44%. So that's 33% to 44% from the same GDC conference. And a lot of the games that were delayed actually include AAA games, like the Outer Worlds port for the Nintendo Switch was delayed for 3 months. The Last of Us Part 2 was delayed for a month. Ghost of Tsushima was delayed for a month. And actually, one of the most infamous examples here is Cyberpunk 2077, which was they promised not to do crunch time for that game. CD Projekt Red promised that they will not be crunching their developers, but because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the desire of the board members to release the game before the end of 2020, a lot of those factors led to a terrible state or a terrible output for Cyberpunk 2077. So there's a lot of problems in the development of games because of the pandemic, and we really have to be, understanding. We are fans. We like the games that they make, and we get disappointed when they output bad games, or when the games that they have been developing get delayed. But they're also humans. They face the same problems that we do, and we should give them some slack for things like this.
Yeah, for the pandemic, pretty much the whole world for a little bit came to a standstill, and the game development side of things is no exception to that. Like, it caused all sorts of, like, the shift to working digitally, or the shift from just not being able to have a group of people actually physically make the headquarters for game development has caused a lot of logistical and, I assume, creative problems as well on the side of the developers.
Yeah, and security risks too. You have to make sure every file getting sent over doesn't leak somewhere. Ugh.
And there might be some people who might counteract our claims by saying that, oh, actually, 2020 was good for gaming. Sales for games were at an all-time high in 2020. People were playing a lot of video games in 2020. But we have to understand that these numbers are actually more of an exception to the rule, because only the bigger developers and the bigger publishers were experiencing these. When they cite increase in sales, we see figures mostly coming from Nintendo with games like Ring Fit Adventure, Animal Crossing, and Doom Eternal. But for most video game developers and publishers, especially for the indie ones, you can't expect them to survive the same way that the bigger publishers are surviving. And even some big giants have been experiencing COVID-19 very badly. Like Sega last year, I think, closed a lot of their operations last year, but mostly their arcades, actually, because COVID-19, people can't go to arcades anymore to play their arcade games. But if you take that into account as part of the whole business of Sega, you can imagine just how much impact COVID-19 had on their operations. So even though you can say that sales for video games in 2020 increased, that's more so because people were staying at home and don't have anything to do, but doesn't really directly lead to more development. Doesn't mean that they're earning more means they can produce video games more, because it's a creative process, and there's a lot more to consider in video games than funding.
Yeah, most of the games that came out last year probably worked on in the previous years before that, when there was no pandemic anyway. So now we're starting to feel the actual ripple effects of the 1 year we lost to COVID.
1 year and counting, by the way. So let's not forget that the pandemic's still ongoing.
Yeah.
It might be better there in stateside if there are people in America listening right now, but for the rest of the world, we're still having to grapple with the pandemic. And a lot of the developers, actually, in Japan and in China most specifically, and there are also budding developers in India and in Russia that are still grappling with the effects of COVID-19 right now.
Yeah, so with all of these things in mind, there are a couple of things that we have to discuss about, the way that we as consumers, and our responsibility as consumers of the game, of games, what we can do, like the small parts that we can do to make things a little bit easier for developers in these times. Like, for one thing, and the easiest thing to do is to not be toxic on social media. Like,
Yeah, definitely.
that's the easy part. It's okay to criticize games. It's okay to criticize E3. It's okay to criticize the announcements, but don't directly attack the developers and the people who are behind all of this, because it's not under their control a lot of the time, especially now in the pandemic situation.
Most of the people who are handling the social media accounts, they don't really make the decisions here. Like, shouting at them on their social media accounts and spewing death threats at them won't change a lot of things. A lot of businesses don't really change just because of public outcry, although sometimes it can work, but most of the time the people are accepting those hate are the people on the ground, the developers, the social media people who are forced to read all of your nasty stuff. And sometimes even some people direct their hate messages directly at publishers and developers, like their personal Twitter accounts, and it's never nice. Like, it's not gonna help anyone doing that.
Yeah, criticism is usually valid, especially if it's constructive and it's like for a better game. But actual death threats and insults won't really help anyone.
So moving forward, what do you guys think we could probably expect from, the rest of the year in video games in the years coming, assuming that, things with the pandemic don't change all that rapidly? Like, are we going to see other conferences or other, sort of game jams and things coming up ahead where we probably won't see too much coming out? It'll be more of the same stuff that have already been announced, just updates that they're continuing to work on it, sort of that thing. What do you guys think? Like, no hard evidence behind it. Like, your 2 cents on what do you think the gaming landscape is going to be like moving forward?
I'm actually kind of excited because I feel like Sony and Microsoft are hitting their stride finally with next gen. So I'm kind of excited. Microsoft's E3 was pretty good, by the way. I'm not a huge fan of their franchises, but I know that these franchises are important and they're finally showing up. So the new Halo, new Forza, Game Pass is pretty legit for $14.99 a month. I'm excited to see Sony's state of play whenever it will be, probably in a month or two. It'll show us more about what they're planning for the PS5. So next gen is finally feeling like it's arrived. I feel like a lot of people still haven't been able to get the console, including me. They're still really hard to find right now, but games are slowly coming out. So I'm really excited to see what Microsoft and Sony are gonna show up with. I feel like Square Enix's big titles will be shown somewhere later. Maybe they're Sony exclusive, so they haven't been shown at E3. But I really want to see more about FF16. What else? I feel like the strategy game-wise, there's a lot of things to look forward to. So I'm really glad. We used to have like such a drought of strategy games. So there's a lot right now to look forward to, I think. I hope the pandemic, like people are getting used to the workflow under the pandemic. So I'm expecting things to like ramp up sooner or later. And some countries are, like we said already, over it.
Getting over it.
Yeah.
As for me, I think because of the pandemic situation, people have been getting into their own routines at home, and routines really work well for live service games. So I think there's going to be a big rise in live service games in the near future. Ubisoft already announced that they're going to focus more on their live service games, more on their AAA games. Actually, imagine live service games now starting to take precedence over AAA games and big publishers like Ubisoft. And apart from that, I think indie developers will be the ones who are going to adapt the best here, because they're used to working from home and having flexible work schedules, and it's kind of like harder for bigger companies to adapt to this global pandemic situation. But I think for companies in the US or in the in first world countries, developers there will be able to get back on their feet just in time for the new console generation. So I think 2022 will be a good year for gaming. But yeah, I think for future conferences, I don't think we will be having anytime soon. Probably the soonest that we can have would be on 2022. I mean, we're starting to have on-site events again now, but in esports we have tournaments, but they're mostly no crowds, only broadcast, and the players are there in the arena. And I think we're gonna be having more of that, because it's also cheaper for the event organizers to not have audiences most of the time. And I think conferences, at least for the rest of 2021, will remain to be online. So my expectation or my wish for the developers and the publishers who will be appearing in these conferences is please be more connective to your audience. Communicate with them, hamper their expectations. I know that it's very alluring to ride the hype and not announce anything or just keep on teasing the fans with empty promises and then deliver nothing in conferences because you actually haven't worked on anything yet. It's fine if you haven't worked on anything yet, but please be honest with your fans and your audience that you haven't done anything, so that no one gets disappointed, no one feels bad about watching at 5 a.m. the morning the E3 conferences. Be more communicative and be more honest with your demographic, and I think everyone will come out happier and no one's disappointed, no one's gonna get death threats. It makes it sound like it's their fault that they're getting death threats, but you're going to get less death threats if you're going to be more honest with your demographic. Like, I really appreciate how Nintendo already diffused the expectations of their audiences by announcing beforehand that their Nintendo Direct at E3 is going to be software only, and I think it really did work well for them, and other developers and publishers can learn a lot from them in future conferences.
Yeah, in terms of gaming, for me, there's still a lot to look forward to in 2021, even if it just be the smaller indie titles, and quite a few AAA games that we already knew were coming out this year. And looking forward to 2022, hopefully, yeah, everyone, like what you guys have mentioned already, they've already gotten more into the swing of the workflow, and we'll see some more interesting, better releases. And I have to agree, I have to hammer home the point even further what Newt said about communication. And more than communication, he said honesty and transparency. I think that's what we're looking for here. It's okay, it would probably be better, and it would also be okay if devs would just admit, or maybe not even the devs. This is probably an issue on, executives
Marketing.
and marketing. Executives, marketing, please just be transparent. It's better for your devs. It's better for the gaming community as a whole. You'll be able to temper the viewers' expectations. You'll be able to make it easier for the devs so they won't have to do crunch time, and we end up with messes like Cyberpunk where it's a marketing fiasco already to begin with, and on top of that, the devs have to do so much more work to try to catch up to everything that the marketing promised. So yeah, like overall, for the sake of the gaming community as a whole, developers and players, it's hard times, and it's okay to admit that it is. So I think that's our episode for today. Like, we've covered a lot about E3. I think it was a lot less about the conference and a lot less about what they announced in the conference, and kind of a lot more about the implications of what E3 had become this year,
Yeah.
This is Upkeep, keeping up with the current times and trends and news, and but the timing schedule is actually this coming out already a week or two departed from E3 itself, so it's not like we're trying to give you announcements from E3 because you most probably have heard of it already, but we just really felt strongly about not kind of defending the devs or the publishers, but reminding everyone to stay human and to stay civil, especially in the internet, because the people who are handling these social media accounts are also human, and you should really think about their mental state and their humanity working there. And
especially now more than ever, that for a lot of people, the internet is our only form of human contact.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, this has been Off Cooldown. I'm Q.
I'm Cal.
this has been Neutral, and I'll see you again next episode.